Hello everyone, this is part 23 of What If Naruto Was the Perfect Shinobi, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Be sure to like and subscribe, it gives me more motivation. Enjoy. Naruto reached over and removed his soaked, torn and bloodstained robe and shirt and tossed both into the water, leaving him clad in nothing but black sweatpants and his white Anbu protective braces. Kisame watched the shirtless Jinchuriki with a curious expression, interested as most genuine swordsmen would be in the weapon he held. The blonde meanwhile tested the weapon, marveling at how weightless the long sword seemed to be, like it was his own natural arm extended. The shark man chuckled when Naruto pointed Kusanagi in preparation to attack, holding Samehada in both hands. The barbaric shaver still ran crimson with the container's blood, and little skin and muscle pieces hung on its razor-sharp barbs. The same nin smirked as he glimpsed the Magatama emblem inscribed into the grasscutter's hilt. He, so it is the Kusanagi. Ooh. What I'd give to see the look on Orochimaru's mug when he realizes. Naruto said nothing, but sneered back as he sprang into the air and held his glowing blade overhead in both hands, coming down on Kisame with a hard swing. The Akatsuki member took a short step back, surprised at the blonde's sudden Juin-enhanced speed burst. However, unlike Orochimaru, the swordsman reacted in time to avoid being hit and parried the blow with his Zanbatsu. Small blue shards rained down around the pair, as Kusanagi's incomparable edge bit into Samehada's scales. Kisame grunted and pushed back against him, sending the Jinchuriki soaring back through the air to his previous position. Naruto landed with a rare grace and cursed as he blocked the big man's counterattack. The sheer power behind the high-speed overhand strike was almost enough to put the blonde right on his knees, and Naruto saw no better luck escaping the resulting interlock. Samehada's mere tip was enough to hold Naruto at a total standstill even with his cursed seal active. Kisame's mouse grin bored into him through the interlocked swords. TCH, such freakish strength. Knowing that he couldn't overcome his predicament with power, a rare occasion where he was concerned, Naruto sank back on his haunches and turned his head aside while still maintaining a token resistance against Kisame's push. As expected, the grinning shark man leaned over the locked weapons to taunt the Jinchuriki. As soon as the blue-skinned Nukenin opened his mouth, Naruto turned to stare right at him and reared his head back like an incensed cobra, spitting potent venom at Kisame's head. The Akatsuki member's expression widened in surprise, and he had no choice but to lean back hard and twist to avoid an acid bath, and lowered the pressure he was exerting on Kusanagi in the process. Naruto seized the moment to escape, slicing a clean line along Samehada's girth. Kisame growled with irritation and sprang towards the blonde, no doubt with another clash in mind, and Naruto likewise skidded back along the water, tucking Kusanagi's inscribed handle under his arm as he made rapid seals. Raiten, Gian. As Kisame closed quarters, the Jinchuriki opened his mouth wide and blasted a huge lightning bolt at the shark man, who as usual intercepted the jutsu with Samehada. The point-blank piercing impact hurled Kisame back a couple paces, but the Zanbatsu still negated Naruto's attack. The lightning crackled along with Samehada as it struck, leaving Kisame's weapon sizzling with a residual electric charge. The missing nin grinned wider, leaving the blonde to leap to the side with a curse as he slammed the empowered blade into the chakra-rich water near him, causing an explosion that sent the container spiraling into the concrete barricade at the building's edge. The collision irritated the still bleeding L on his back. Kisame smirked and parted his robes a little. Rubber leggings, how stupid of me not to notice. Of course, an experienced warrior who was in his element in the water would have a counter prepared against potential enemies who would use electric-based ninjutsu on him. Kisame wore white rubber stockings beneath his Akatsuki robes that rose almost to his massive thighs. Naruto had little time to regret his latest mistake, however, as Samehada heaved down at his head a second later. The blonde rolled to the side and the shaving blade missed him, and instead tore through the barrier, causing the standing water pulled inside to begin leaking out over the edge. Kisame tried to stomp his back next, and the prone Naruto somersaulted again to avoid it, and then rose and parried another sweeping Zanbatsu hack using Kusanagi. You're pathetic at this, kid. Doesn't matter much how great the sword is when the person holding it's got no SK. Naruto ignored the taunt, knowing somewhere inside that it was the truth, and spun to Kisam's back. The shark nin retaliated with a spinning horizontal slash as he pivoted. The Jinchuriki leapt over the predictable attack, and Kisam's head turned right in time to meet the blonde's sandal heel. Bone and cartilage collapsed inward beneath the hard kick as the Akatsuki member's nose crumbled, splattering blood against Naruto's pants leg. Kisame recoiled as though struck with lightning, staggering back several paces, and pressed a painted hand to his shattered nose while shouldering Samehada with the other. The Kirinukanen snarled when his hand came back covered in crimson, opening his mouth wide and exposing pointed teeth, stained red where blood poured down his shattered nose into his lips. That was a huge mistake, brat. Kisame breathed in and out hard through his mouth, giving him an even more maniacal appearance as he glared. The same nin swung his blade hard at the blonde, using both hands and all his might. Naruto glided to the side, and Samehada slammed into the cement ground hard enough to splinter the concrete, creating a small crater where it impacted. The standing water provided little resistance to the harsh blow, and small shards fell into the container's ankles, tearing holes in his black pants. However, Kisame's move gave the Jinchuriki an idea, and he drove Kusanagi into the concrete in a position above Samehada, pinning the larger blade in place. The Akatsuki member then reached over to wrap his bloodstained hand around Naruto's tee rather than pulling his barbaric weapon loose, bringing the Anbu over closer to those glistening shark's teeth. Kisame's breath stank like blood, and the blonde glimpsed the ornate-looking ring on his hand, inscribed with the kanji representing South. Goo, bastard, breath smells like boiled s. Kisame chuckled, and his mouth opened even wider. You know, I'm starving, and I'm sure the others wouldn't mind me taking a little nibble. You don't have to be in mint condition. Naruto raised a leg and channeled as much chakra into the limb as he could, and then slammed it against the weakened concrete. The high-powered stomp was enough to shatter the ground, creating a complete hole where the crater had been, that expanded outward as the blonde's chakra rippled through the cracked cement. Neither Shinobi could avoid tumbling through, but the Jinchuriki was prepared while Kisame was not. The blonde caught onto a steel support rod that remained where the concrete had crumbled loose around it, and his opponent plummeted 3 stories down into the commercial warehouse with Samehada trailing behind him, losing his grip on Naruto's en in the surprise gambit. Naruto laughed and used the bent metal rod as a brace to pull back to his previous spot, and hailed down into the dank storehouse once he had regained his bearings. Hey, I should have remembered to mention, that last step can be a real cur. The vessel couldn't see Kisame within the warehouse, but a loud splash indicated that he'd landed somewhere within the standing water that had leaked in through the street even as more poured in through the hole Naruto had created moments earlier. He could however see the bright metal barrels littering the area, each marked with a peculiar hazard sign. For some reason, the Jinchuriki wasn't surprised that some asshole would house dangerous combustible chemicals in the building next to his apartment complex. However, it proved convenient now. The teenager placed Kusanagi on solid ground and ran through a practiced hand seal sequence. Kaiten, Kuryu Enden. Naruto's dragon tore through the hole into the warehouse, and the reaction was instant. The Jinchuriki grabbed Kusanagi again and was on the run as soon as the chemicals inside the warehouse began exploding, making towards Yugao, who was hacking on the ground attempting to regain her breath. The explosion must have been enough to eradicate Kisame's clone, and the water prison along with it. His crimson serpent, which had remained idle at his command ever since being summoned to protect him, caught him in mid-stride. Naruto smirked and hopped onto the creature's en, shooing over to Yugao and reaching a hand out to help her up as he placed Kusanagi across his lap. The building began to shake, and its walls started collapsing while noxious chemical smoke curled through broken windows. You remain as subtle as ever, I see. The purple-haired Kunoichi's voice was hoarse with breathlessness, but her tone wasn't quite scathing enough to be genuine. Yugao seemed to be more impressed that Naruto had managed to take an S-class like Kisame down in such a grandiose manner. The container urged his serpent mount towards the crumbling building's edge as soon as his superior's wet, cold arm slid around his waist, using him as a support. The snake paused close to the edge, allowing Naruto to look out through the hole Kisame had in the low barrier wall earlier. The blonde smirked and called over his shoulder. Hold on tight, now. The Jinchuriki bent low against the serpent and commanded it over the edge. The entire structure began to collapse, and enormous wood and concrete chunks tumbled headlong towards the ground. The snake reached the water-drenched street right as the main walls crumbled to pieces, leaving nothing but cement rubble and a partial, rusted iron skeleton. Residual chemical sludge oozed through the cracks in the pile and mixed in with the rushing water, and same had his tip poked outward through its master's cement tomb. Naruto approached the debris hill with Kusanagi in hand, but stopped short when a massive chakra and king intent exploded beneath. Impossible. No mortal man could have survived that. Kimimaro, then Orochimaru and now Kisame, it seemed that no one ever had the good grace to Fing S when Naruto buried him alive. The whole thing was exasperating. Naruto scowled and rushed back to the serpent when the water began to leak out, and right in time, as the expanding interior pressure soon caused the whole pile to blow asunder. Hoshigaki Kisame stood cresting the rising water once more, and he wasn't pleased. The grin was long since gone. The Mist Nin's patterned robes were torn and burnt, but he was otherwise unharmed save a couple minor scars and bruises. Naruto's serpent tore down the street in an attempt to escape the oncoming wave. No a tree, a stone slab and a building all haven't worked. I'll have to use a mountain next time, I guess. The summoned snake managed to keep pace with Kisame's high-speed tsunami, moving along the wet road while the oncoming water tore apart whatever happened to be in its path. The serpents in general lacked the overall intelligence and independent jutsu capabilities that other contract beasts possessed, but none could match them in pure speed. Naruto, evasive action. Turn right now. Naruto swerved to the side, and a shark missile streaked past his previous position, headed on a collision course with a building. Oi! Pipe down. I can't stand a backseat driver. The water shark instead twisted about in midair and came rushing back towards the two Anbu. Naruto scowled and lashed out with the Kusanagi, cutting the jutsu apart. Yugao looked back and then shredded a second incoming water missile into a soaking mist with a Futon blast. The road started to incline as Naruto maneuvered his reptilian mount through the soaked slums towards the higher ground at the village outskirts. The Jinchuriki was unable to change his course onto the more narrow roads owing to the snake's mammoth size, and unable to abandon his current vehicle lest he get swept into Kisame's tsunami. This road leads straight to AS end. Naruto ducked low and allowed a third missile to streak overhead. The water shark's liquid teeth tore into a power pole, which caused live wires to tumble into the street, buzzing and radiating with a visible charge. The Jinchuriki glowered and made several rapid hand signs, ending with a snake seal. Trust me. There's no higher ground than the encampment wall. The cobblestone pavement beneath the wires then morphed into thick mud, which at the blonde's command churned into a whirlpool and sucked the exposed live wires down deep into the earth, grounding out the charge. Naruto's snake swerved to avoid getting tangled into the remainder, and then put on extra speed to keep pace with the tsunami and Kisame. Soon enough, the towering wooden wall that surrounded and protected Konoha against invasion came into view. Kisame's rough, enraged voice shouted down behind the two plainclothes Anbu as he also glimpsed the nearing wall, loud over the rushing water. Oh, I see the big plan now. Well, too bad, that's not going to work, Gaki. More chakra spilled into the air, and the oncoming wave increased in speed and overtook Naruto and Yugao in what seemed a mere instant, sweeping both Anbu underneath the roaring water. The Jinchuriki slammed hard into the pavement, and then the current pulled him back to whip him into the barrier wall. His back racked with pain as his raw, irritated cuts burst wide open once more. Naruto plunged the Kusanagi to the hilt into the encampment wall when the water began pulling him back out again, and thus anchored into position. Even holding on was a struggle, however, as the assaulting tide slammed into him and pressed him harder against the wooden wall, which held strong against the torrential surge. Yugao was nowhere to be seen, not that the blonde could have seen much regardless given the spots swimming in his vision. Damn, too strong. At long last the attack ended, and the water began to cascade back down the sloping road into Konoha proper, leaving rampant debris and innumerable damaged buildings standing in its wake. Naruto ached all over, but had no reprieve, as he at once sensed Kisame's enormous presence closing in on him once more. His soaked blonde head whipped over in time to see the Scark Nin rushing down the encampment wall with same Hada poised to rend. Naruto grunted and wrenched the Kusanagi loose, and propelled towards the ground right as Kisame's blade tore into the wall, carving a long gash into the thick wood. The Akatsuki swordsman snarled and rappelled against the wall as well, using his monstrous leg strength to ricochet towards Naruto and cleave him on landing. The tumbling Jinchuriki reached to his back and smeared his hand with blood, and then wiped it onto his summon tattoo. As he landed, the blonde shinobi twisted and landed in an almost acrobatic handstand, which allowed him to both complete the summoning and spring back towards the wall. Kuchio's no jutsu. Black ritual summon markings spread outward where Naruto's hand touched the pavement, and smoke exploded into the air. Kisame growled out a curse and swung Samehada as he landed on instinct, but hit nothing but air. Meanwhile, the cobblestone street beneath the Kiri-nin exploded around him and a huge, brown-colored serpent's head emerged through the soil beneath to swallow him whole. Kisame used Samehada as a splint to keep the serpent's mouth open as the remainder shurred out. Meanwhile, he struggled to get loose, but in vain. The snake's massive pronged tongue coiled around him and pulled the shark man into its cavernous digestive tract, and Samehada slipped loose and trailed behind Kisame a second later. Both swordsman and weapon were consumed alive. Naruto let out a pained breath and slumped against the wall, using the Kusanagi like a cane to remain standing, watching with a morbid interest as the enormous man-sized bulge progressed deeper and deeper into the grinning serpent's guts. HMPH, snakebait. Serves that bastard right. I hope it takes him a long time to S in there. Yugao's voice was almost a pained groan. Naruto let his curse seal recede back into his N and looked over down at the Anbu Kunoiki where she was reclined against the encampment wall near him. Her condition wasn't much better than his, as she was covered in shallow SCRS and bruises where the tidal wave had knocked her about, and Naruto's Jinchuriki nature made him much more resilient in general. He extended a hand to help her stand, but she shook her purple-haired head and remained where she was, glaring at Kisame's predicament with that same ice-cold, remorseless expression. SCA re, I'm sure glad we're not enemies. The snake gagged and started writhing as the bulge that indicated Kisame's position began to pulsate. He's going to escape, don't let it happen. Naruto nodded and measured his next stroke. The serpent lurched back in pain and exposed its tender stomach, giving the Jinchuriki his opening. He supposed it was bad karma to K his own summoned creature, but he was in no position to quibble over morals. I know that, not this time, big man. The blonde Anbu rushed with the Kusanagi in hand and seed back to skewer Kisame inside the snake's gut. White light trailed behind the blade. However, Naruto almost got impaled instead when Samehada speared out through the snake's husk, showering him in gore. The container's acute battle senses spared him a gaping hole in his own stomach to match the now-S reptiles, and Naruto leapt back towards his place at the wall once more, cursing all the while at the man that wouldn't be beaten. The Akatsuki member at last lumbered out through the hole he'd torn. There were acid holes burned into his robes to complement the earlier scorch marks, and his blue skin seemed to have taken on a light purplish tinge. Kisame's spiked indigo hair was matted down with snake saliva, and his robes glistened with it. Naruto snorted at his appearance with a sneer, which seemed to make the shark man even angrier. Ah, that was the last straw, kid. You'll be coming along minus a limb or two now. Naruto tensed and watched as Kisame pulled Samehada out behind him. Rather than rushing with his blade, however, the Kiri missing nin reached over to grab the med snake's mandible and hurled the enormous reptilian corpse at the Jinchuriki at a high speed, who had his back pressed against a high wall and had nowhere to dodge. The blonde let out a scream and slashed at the snake with his sword. Iced cold blood gushed all over him, and the corpse scattered into clean-cut pieces to either side. However, as soon as Naruto completed the swing, Samehada slammed into his shoulder, snapping bone and shredding muscle. Kusanagi clattered onto the cement with a loud clank, with Naruto's severed arm still gripping the handle. Naruto. Kisame responded to Yugao's hoarse scream with an insane grin, as the blonde lay motionless. His amusement didn't last long, however. Innumerable hissing serpents emerged through the bleeding stump located on Naruto's shoulder and coiled around Samehada as the blonde disintegrated into snakes. The shark man scowled and attempted to shake his reptilian assailants loose and almost stumbled as even more serpents moved to wrap around his muscular legs. At last, Kisame let out an aggravated shout and hurled his weapon aside when the snakes began biting at his arm, at which point the Kusanagi on the ground morphed into a large-sized snow-white cobra. The albino snake reared and hissed, and struck at the Kiri-nin's T. Kisame noticed at the last moment and reached out to grab the cobra around the end right as its venom-coated teeth were about to sink into his. Damned snakes. You're even more irritating than Orochimaru, punk. The same nin struggled with the enraged serpent as it continued to attempt to lunge at him, and at last hurled it over his shoulder into the air. Naruto sprang out through the hole in the ground that his earlier summon had created and hurtled at Kisam's back. The Kusanagi cobra reverted back into the sword in midair, and the container caught it on the move. The blonde reared back and took aim straight at the shark man's heart, holding his new weapon in both hands. Have a taste of this, bastard. Kisame sensed the incoming attack and tried to move aside as he didn't have Samehada in his hands to block it, but Yugao tackled his legs, causing him to lose his balance. The Akatsuki member managed to reposition so as not to take a lethal hit, and the Kusanagi impaled through his shoulder as though it were mere air. The shark man's right arm seized and dangled at his side, and blood leaked out down his soiled Akatsuki robes. His blue skin paled to a sick pallor around the wound. Kisame coughed and gurgled as blood rose into his tea, and then looked down at the glowing blade skewered into him with a pointed grin, showing red sharpened teeth. He, not bad, brat. I've got to admit, that one stings a little. But still. The shark man leaned down to leer right at Naruto and grabbed the white-hot blade in his remaining good arm, not even seeming to care that Kusanagi burned into his skin on contact, making pungent smoke rise into the air. Kisame's loud breathing reverberated in his ears. It didn't accomplish a single damn thing in the end. Kisame tore the blade loose with an enraged bellow that almost shattered Naruto's sensitive eardrums, again overpowering the smaller Jinchuriki with ease. The Kirinukanen grabbed tighter onto the Kusanagi and twisted, making Naruto relinquish his hold on the weapon lest he have his wrist snapped. Kisame hurled the weapon to the side, near across the street, and reversed his arm motion to deliver a crushing punch to his opponent's chin. Naruto almost blacked out on the spot and was sent spiraling into the air. His listless husk did a complete revolution in midair and then slammed onto the pavement with a sickening thud. The Anbu couldn't hold back a groan as he tried to climb onto his knees, but Kisame's massive leg came down on his stomach hard, slamming him back into the ground, ribs cracking with the blow. Fuck. The vicious impact was more than Naruto's guts could take, and he emptied his morning rice onto the pavement, making his ribs hurt more. There was more than a little blood mixed into the vomit. The blonde's esophagus burned where the acid coated his tea lining. Naruto winced when Kisame's massive hand wrapped around his skull in a claw grip and shoved him down into the puke. He could imagine the other man's cruel grin, mocking the proud shinobi as he rubbed his nose and mouth against the pavement into his own disgusting vomit. The shark nin then launched him into the encampment wall, where his spiked head impacted the hardwood with a loud crack. Naruto blacked out this time, and toppled back down to earth in a heap. He regained consciousness mere seconds later, head screaming with an apparent concussion, right in time to see that huge blue paw clenching around his sortie and ell him back upright, at least as well as he could see with swimming vision. Kisame chuckled again and measured a knee strike, pinning Naruto against the wall with a merciless choke. That's enough, Kisame. Kisame stopped and turned his head to meet the voice, which Naruto recognized through his own pain as being Uchiha Itachi's, that seemed to originate somewhere behind the pair. However, the big swordsman continued to hold him against the barrier. Ah, Itachi-san. You're right on time. The Uchiha landed on the pavement next to Kisame without a sound and stared at the beaten demon vessel. The two were stranding about at even height due to Naruto being lurched over in the shark's grip. There was zero compassion in that piercing crimson gaze, not that Naruto could have expected much in that regard. Itachi had gutted his own mother with no hesitation or remorse. Now able to move a little, Naruto was able to revert his gaze enough to see Yugao unconscious on the ground in the direction whence Itachi had come, explaining the no help he'd received there. The smaller Akatsuki's voice held a slight reprimand, though in general he sounded as emotionless as usual. Remember the mission. The Jinchuriki must be captured alive, or else our goal is lost. Kisame gave a one-armed shrug, as he was still unable to move his other shoulder, and reached into his burnt, shredded, slime-covered robes to retrieve some item, releasing his hold on Naruto in the process. Disoriented and weakened with blood loss, the blonde collapsed to the ground in a heap. Kisame meanwhile tossed whatever thing he'd retrieved to his Sharingan-wielding partner, and then turned and stalked across the road to retrieve Samehada, clutching his useless shoulder using his remaining hand. Relax. I wasn't intending to K him. This Gaki needed to be taught a little lesson in respect, that's all. Itachi hinted, in response, keeping his attention locked on Naruto. The blonde tried to stand, but stumbled. The Uchiha's hand wrapped around his arm right below the elbow and prevented his taking another spill, but not to assist him, as he discovered a second later when something cold and metallic clamped onto his wrist. His tenketsu numbed as soon as the shackle locked into place. The blonde could still sense the power inside him but couldn't mold the chakra to utilize it. Naruto tried to resist when Itachi grabbed at his other wrist, but with such little access to his chakra he couldn't accomplish much against an S-class shinobi. A third Akatsuki member landed behind Itachi, with a dangerous-looking puppet gliding in the air next to him. Sasori-san, this wasn't in the plan. Your assigned role was to lead the Konoha Nin elsewhere. The small red-haired man glanced at Itachi, and then his head rotated on his end to level his stare back into Konoha. Naruto watched as he manipulated the puppet at his side to open its mouth and spew out some strange black powder in a constant stream. The Akatsuki puppeteer, named Sasori as Naruto had heard, turned back to level the captured Biju container with an appraising stare and spoke in a bored, irritated voice. Meanwhile, his puppet's black sand levitated high into the air and coalesced into a swirling cloud high above the village. I'm aware. I ran into an unexpected complication. Our source was mistaken, it seems. Deidara has escaped with the other. An explanation wasn't long in coming. At that moment, several masked, armed and madder than all hell Anbu arrived on the scene, with the Sandaime Hokage taking the lead in person. The Black Ops shinobi landed in groups, most taking position atop buildings to have the high ground over the three missing nin in the street below, while Sarutobi appeared opposite them on the road with Enma, still bearing the wounds he'd incurred in battle against Orochimaru not long past, Yamato and another Anbu squadron at his side. Kisame grinned and looked around at the arrangement, and then grabbed onto Samehada's handle where the blade was strapped on his back in preparation to K. This is no big deal. The more, the merrier. I'm steamed enough to take on a whole nation right about now. Itachi ignored his partner's bravado and took a step towards the old man, pulling on the manacle chains in an attempt to bring Naruto with him. However, the blonde Jinchuriki held his ground, and the Uchiha didn't seem to care enough to press the issue. More than a score king blades poised to strike in unison in response to Kisame's threatening move. The Konoha Nuken and Itachi stared at his old cage, as the ominous black cloud continued to swirl overhead. How inconvenient. You weren't supposed to return until tomorrow, Sandaime-sama. The third Hokage returned his ex-Anbu captain's cold stare in equal measure, not letting the Sharingan's mind-warping power intimidate him in the least. A mirthless smile crossed the old man's wizened lips, as he regarded the three men who had near lain complete waste to his unprepared village. And you were not discreet enough in coming here, Itachi-kun. An Anbu scout team managed to glimpse quite the conspicuous little bird soaring straight towards the village. Itachi glanced over into the air, looking towards something in the distance that Naruto couldn't see, and then reached to his brow to brush the hair there to the side. He didn't look to be all too bothered that the Hokage had learned about Akatsuki's approach, as he placed his arm inside his robes. I see, no matter. Allow us to take Naruto-kun with us and we will leave on our own and not return. Forbid us the nine tails and our organization will keep coming back until we have achieved that aim. Please be a wise Hokage and spare this village and its people more needless harm, and hand the Jinchuriki over now. Sarutobi's expression narrowed in anger, but the old man said nothing as he seemed to mull the matter over in his mind, staring between the Akatsuki and the bound Jinchuriki. Naruto wanted to believe that the Sandaime would never accept, but knew that as Hokage, his mentor would never place a single shinobi's plight above his entire village. Thus, the issue boiled down to whether Sarutobi would trust the rogue Uchiha at his word. Naruto rather doubted it, and was soon enough proven right. At long last, the third shook his head in the negative. Enma changed into the Kongo Nyoi beside him, and the Hokage took his weapon in hand, glaring as though he had never even considered accepting the proposal. A blood traitor's word holds no capital here. And regardless, this village will never negotiate terms with criminals. USC will S now. During the short conversation, an Anbu team managed to move around atop the buildings and climb the barrier wall, taking the highest ground and completing the envelopment. The Akatsuki were now surrounded on all sides. Despite this, Sasori moved into the neutral zone, with his puppet right behind. Kisame crouched low with his usable hand on Samehada, prepared to battle again despite his still bleeding wounds, teeth bared in his sadistic shark grin. This chatter begins to bore me. Itachi, we will be taking the Jinchuriki still. I did not come here and waste all this time to leave without the target. Itachi nodded and retreated to stand a step behind Kisame. Proceed, then. Neglected to a large extent in this whole exchange was Naruto, and with good reason, as he was unable to do much except watch in his present state, and was isolated against a huge wall with 3 Akatsuki members. But right as Sasori was set to make his opening move, a glowing white missile streaked right towards Itachi and Kisame behind him, on a line to their prisoner. The two Nukanen evaded to either side, and Naruto locked his arms parallel to each other, somehow knowing what the Kusanagi was about to do, and the propelling blade spun in midair and slashed apart the manacles binding his wrists. The Jinchuriki took an opportunistic blade swipe at Itachi, who landed nearest him, and then leapt into the air when the Uchiha ducked under the stroke. The Hokage smirked and motioned the Anbu to attack at the same moment, as the unexpected move had drawn his enemy's attention. Ha! So long, assholes. I'll be sure to send a card or something. Naruto caught against the wall and sprang over the 3 Akatsuki, landing next to the third, who regarded the Kusanagi in his hand with curious amazement. Itachi observed his escape with what the blonde almost thought was an amused look, but he decided he must have been mistaken, as he blinked and the Uchiha's expression was as blank as ever. Kisame used Samehada to protect the two against incoming jutsu while his partner mounted counterattacks as he was able. Sasori stared and commanded his puppet to raise its arm, making no move to retreat despite the Anbu rushing him. Yamato happened to look into the air, and shouted out at his comrades due to what he glimpsed there. Fall back. The black powder in the air began to pack together into small hail pellets and rain back towards the ground. The Anbu abandoned the attack on Sasori and leapt back to their previous positions, though a couple weren't able to escape the street in time and were crushed when the metal rain hit the ground, breaking cobblestone and singing large holes in a couple buildings. Sarutobi blanched as he recognized the puppet's technique. Yamato rushed in and grabbed the unconscious Yugao in the meantime, and pulled her into the clear right as Sasori's attack hit. A metallic tang entered Naruto's nose when the powder recoiled back into the air on impact. The Hokage brought his weapon into a guard position and spoke in a harsh tone. Satetsu, then that puppet must be unthinkable. Sasori leveled the sandime with a leer and manipulated the iron sand into several sharp metal tentacles, which rushed at the old man in unison. Sarutobi grunted and used the Kongo Nyoi to repel the onslaught, not letting a single tendril past his guard. His masked guards meanwhile used the opening to rush Sasori with their blades aimed to K, using several attack points in an attempt to swarm the Akatsuki member, but their katana slammed into the ground as the puppeteer used the third Kazekige's magnetic control Kekkei Genkai abilities to make their swords too seabursome to hold, halting their movement long enough to attack again. HMPH, that's right, Gramps. But this sandime hasn't grown crippled with old age. The puppeteer's other arm then changed into a cannon-like attachment, which blasted high-pressure water at the stunned Anbu in a broad sweeping motion, blasting them hard down the street to where Sarutobi and Naruto stood, each battling back the adaptable Satetsu attacks with their respective melee weapons. The water cannon hit hard enough to put cracks in their tough combat armor. The Black Ops soldiers recovered, however, and hung back to pursue an alternate method. The ANBU, with the Hokage at the helm, let loose with a massed long-distance barrage. Sasori glowered with irritation and pulled his iron sand back, molding it into a thick metal shield to repel the thrown weapons and incoming ninjutsu. Naruto hung back and observed, too exhausted to add in a shot. Mokuton Haijutsu, Jukai Kuten. Sasori leapt back with his puppet towards his two comrades, when a huge tree sprouted in the broken street beneath him. Yamato's attack was nowhere near as potent as the first Hokage's would have been, but was still serviceable enough. Meanwhile, an exhausted Uchiha Itachi and a one-armed Hoshigaki Kisame took on two Anbu squads at once and more than held their own against Konoha's elite shinobi despite the severe numerical handicap. A single masked shinobi was ked on the ground with his skull bashed in, no doubt due to getting mangled with the irresistible Samehada, while several others sported both minor and serious wounds. Itachi sported no blood other than his enemies still. Their situation remained critical, however, as both Akatsuki members were weakening. Naruto saw Itachi's stamina ebbing a little more with each high-speed exchange, and Kisame had lost much blood due to his shoulder wound, and having to wield Samehada in one arm took its toll as well. Sasori-san, the Jinchuriki has escaped us this time, there is no purpose to continuing here. The crimson-haired man didn't complain, and molded his iron sand into twin square battering rams, sending them to attack the ambush set against Itachi and Kisame. The masked elites evaded the lethargic attack with total ease, but it accomplished its purpose nonetheless, making them retreat back into the same direction as their comrades. The envelopment was now broken, and Sasori's puppet pointed its arms towards the opposing Konoha nin. The Hitokugutsu Sandaime Kazekage showed an eerie smile as several compartments on its outstretched arms opened, and small pipes emerged. Hissing canister bombs blasted out through the tubes in all directions and rolled along the ground, striking building walls and bouncing about. The grenades exploded in a violent chain reaction and noxious gas enveloped the whole area, reducing the Akatsuki to mere silhouettes. Its poisonous gas remained clear. The ANBU, as well as Sarutobi and the Naruto whose wearied limbs protested the movement, leapt onto the buildings to avoid the rolling gas. The toxic smoke cleared and rose into the winter air, and nothing remained where the Akatsuki had stood save a hole in the wall. Flames as black as a moonless night smoldered around the hole's edges, and Naruto's superior vision allowed him to glimpse Kisame hauling a now unconscious Itachi over his shoulder into the horizon, with Sasori gliding on metallic wings in the air a little step behind. That quick glance was all he could get, as the iron sand then moved to cover the hole over and prevent pursuit. Akatsuki had come and gone like the wind. The tree Yamato had created, which had withered and on the spot due to Sasori's poison, served as an appropriate testament to the situation. XXXXXXXXXX. A long distance to the north, inside a dank, torch-lit room located within an underground bunker, another man sat swathed in bandages on a high-backed chair. Orochimaru's combat wounds were not healing well at all, and his right arm was reduced to a charred lump. Regenerating such damage would be a simple matter under normal circumstances. However, the Serpent Man's current predicament happened to coincide with his need to move hosts, and his current vessel was beginning to strain against his invading soul. Executing even minor techniques was problematic in his present state, and his medics, even Kabuto, likewise could do little to heal him using hacked and coughed, and a little blood streamed down his chin as he spoke to the room in a rasping hiss. GRGH, curse that old orangutan and his pet demon. I will have revenge. First, however, he would require a new host. He had several candidates in reserve, but none met his ideal. More than once since the botched invasion he had pondered whether he should have gone ahead with marking Uchiha Sasuke with his Juin. However, Orochimaru remained convinced that the brat wouldn't have been able to survive the activation process, at least at that time. Had he gotten the chance, he might have marked him during the actual invasion, as the Uchiha had shown drastic improvement in that month span. At the same time, loath as Orochimaru ever was to have to acknowledge his mistakes, the Sannin would admit in his own mind that he had miscalculated in believing that the cursed seal could bind a raging Jinchuriki to his will. Even that mistake could have some use, though. His ex-comrades would no doubt be moving soon enough, and perhaps the seal would allow Naruto-kun to show them a horrid time in the inevitable attempt to capture him. The Serpent Man chuckled aloud, taking a long moment to envision Akatsuki's shock. You seem to be in quite the chipper mood this morning, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru had sensed Kabuto coming in the distance, and thus showed no surprise at his personal medic's arrival. His golden gaze moved to the room's sole entrance, located at his back. Not the wisest place, more so given his condition, but the heavy Sennin knew that no one outside his operation even knew about this secret base, and no potential assassin would ever be able to reach his personal quarters undetected. The resolute sound force standing guard outside his room at all times would guarantee as much. Kabuto waited in silence to be beckoned inside, and strode in holding clean bandages and his own potent medicinal balm. Orochimaru grinned at his clever right-hand man and relaxed on his posh cushioned throne. I was thinking on how even the most negative events can sometimes reap unexpected rewards. Kabuto smirked back, black orbs glittering in the torchlight beneath his spectacles. The medic nin laid the bandages and ointment onto a small wooden table next to Orochimaru's chair and reached into his equipment satchel to retrieve a metal scalpel. The snake Sannin shrugged his silken casual robes loose and allowed his minion to begin to into his bloodstained wrappings. Kabuto went about his work with a surgeon's precision, revealing burnt and bleeding chalk-white skin underneath the cloth wrappings. And once again, he demonstrated the keen perceptiveness that amused and aggravated his master at the same time. Ah, I understand. I've received the latest scout report. As predicted, Akatsuki is now moving on Konoha, and with 2 teams no less. A lesser man might have started a bit at Kabuto's last comment, but Orochimaru remained silent and let this news roll over him, and it was interesting news. Through all his time with the criminal group, the Serpent Shinobi had never known Akatsuki to send more than 1 pair on a given assignment. The heavy Sennin craned his angular head to peer at the large research table located against the near wall, on which glass vials containing various potions and chemicals sat alongside experimental notes and jutsu research scrolls. However, the oddest item was what caught the man's attention. A severed hand, withered and skeletal, sat on a small pedestal, and on the smallest digit was a priceless ring engraved with the character Kuchen, representing the void. His remaining wrist erupted with a phantom pain, as Orochimaru remembered all too well the manner in which he had lost the original sitting there on the table. That's quite the arrangement. I do hope the village manages to survive. And he did, though not due to sentimental reasons. Konoha surviving the attack would pit its shinobi and resources against Akatsuki, and in having his 2 personal enemies preoccupied with one another, Orochimaru would have time enough to replenish his ranks, regain his power and await other opportunities to strike back against either, or both. He could be patient. A mundane concept such as time meant little to an immortal. The snake Sannin pondered on this, even as an irritation with how long Kabuto was taking to massage that damned balm into his skin prickled against Orochimaru's ill temper. I wish we could be there. I'm certain Naruto-kun will give them a huge shock. He's proven that he can win on their level. The snake man lowered his gaze to the stub that had once been his right arm while shuddering with silent laughter. Beneath, however, Orochimaru seethed due to Kabuto's pinpoint but subtle reminder that a senior citizen and a street punk had bested him in combat, as well as the understanding that the medic had chosen his words with that exact reaction in mind. Had he the Kusanagi at his disposal, the serpent's sudden rage might have seen the blade buried within the bespectacled shinobi's tea. However, the sword no longer heeded his call, and its previous master had a good idea where it had gone. Orochimaru cared little, were he to be honest. The Kusanagi was but a tool, the same as his other things, human or otherwise, and he cared naught about the weapon past its potential use to him. Naruto-kun could thus borrow it, and the snake Sannin would even bless the marriage provided it reaped dividends in said Akatsuki members. Orochimaru would reclaim his sword on the next meeting, at a time and place he would choose, and use it to K the upstart punk. His sudden rage passed, and the madman leered at his impetuous subordinate with an amused grin. That's right. Even though the original plan didn't pan out, his new powers will serve our interests still in allowing him to eliminate the Akatsuki. Orochimaru's sudden king intent was enough to warn the medic that he had been moving on hazardous ground, and even in his wretched condition, the snake Sannin remained equal to dealing with all but the most lethal S-class opponents. Kabuto ceased his goading and agreed with his master with a nod and a pleasant smile, and began to prepare his new bandages. A silver lining in even the blackest cloud. Orochimaru sensed a panicked presence rushing down the corridors, and a moment later, a teenager with an identical sleeping twin protruding through his back halted at the room's entrance. Kabuto gave the sound for's leader, a titled newcomer had presumed to when Kimimaro had been slain in combat, little more than a glance as he continued with his meticulous work, and Orochimaru spared his kneeling minion no consideration at all. Saken didn't move or speak as he bowed low to the ground, unwilling to risk insulting his master. The pale snake man smirked on his throne at the Juin-marked teenager's servile behavior, and at last addressed his waiting underling. I do seem to recall asking not to be disturbed, S.A.kun. This had best be important. Saken strode into the room, painted lips compressed into a thin, worried line. Orochimaru looked into a mirror on the wall opposite him to observe the teenager without needing to move his head. The elite guard shinobi held out some photograph which Kabuto at once moved to take, pushing his glasses up his nose. The surveillance cameras caught some unwelcome visitors right outside this base. The snake Sannin chuckled on hearing the general situation. So, some Konoha fools have come calling, well, they will be disposed of easily enough. The visitors were Konoha Anbu, no doubt. For Sarutobi to send his best soldiers on a mission with Akatsuki poised to attack his village, the old baboon must have been even more muddle-headed than Orochimaru had guessed. Though he supposed it was a good plan on paper, holding his attack dogs back long enough to make the serpent man relax his guard ever so little and then ordering the assault. The snake Sanin wondered how Naruto-kun might react when the Akatsuki met his beloved Hokage. Perhaps the Jinchuriki could even come to Orochimaru seeking a means to obtain sweet revenge. Konoha pursuit troops, and this late, I wouldn't have imagined Sarutobi-sensei to have such ruthlessness in him. Amusing, ku. Kabuto said nothing, but thrust the picture towards Orochimaru, who took it with an aggravated scowl, not liking the medic's abrupt disrespect. And what he saw there could have chilled his blood to solid ice. Kakazu's pitiless visage seemed to stare right into his heart. The Falls Nin's partner was a man the serpent didn't recognize, and had to be a new recruit into the organization given that neither Orochimaru nor Kabuto knew about him. Faced now with his living nightmare come to pass, the snake Sanin began to cackle aloud, a low, rasping sound tinged with complete madness. Orochimaru crushed the photo in his hand and tossed his head back while almost wailing with insane mirth. At last he hurled the crumpled picture into the wall and rested his elbow on his throne's armrest and cupped his chin in his hand, rubbing it in thought while seeming to stare into nothingness. The snake man spoke in a low voice. Hey, so, Akatsuki has at last come to K me outright, how interesting. Kabuto and the Sound Four all seemed to be a bit unnerved as the group watched their master and commander become unglued on the spot. A loud crash sounded in the air somewhere in the distance, and then an ear-piercing scream as some nameless Oto Nin met his gruesome end at the Akatsuki pair's hands. The danger was now looming quite near and the Sound Four steeled themselves to battle. Their cursed seals activated and covered their B in arcane patterns, and the six-armed Kidomaru spoke to his master in an almost pleading voice. Master, please escape this place while there's still time. Let us deal with this garbage. Orochimaru made a great show about struggling to stand, using his one arm as a brace to support his weight, though in truth he was quite able to move around as needed despite his burns and illness. Kabuto moved to assist him, but the serpent man shrugged the medic loose. The heavy Sennin smiled at his elite personal guards, the best and strongest in his entire operation, who had all managed to survive the Juin and harness its power. He had no doubt that the Sound Four would meet his expectations in their last battle. Such mindless devotion, just like Kimimaro, it's also very heartwarming. The serpent man supposed that the least he could do was to allow his little children to march to their doom with pride in their chests, and the conviction that their actions were to guard his escape. Meanwhile, Orochimaru conceived a scheme to turn this situation to his own advantage. He needed a new host, and now two prime candidates had come to him. Akatsuki's leader might as well have placed little ribbons on them. The snake man understood Kakazu's nature well enough to know how the man would act, and laid his plans in accordance. For the opening move, he motioned his elites into action. Indeed, go out there and show our guests how hospitable the hidden sound is to unwanted trespassers. Await them in the training hall. Orochimaru watched with his own twisted pride as his men saluted and moved out to be said, and with such determination to succeed. Armed with such resolve, perhaps his Sound Four might even manage to cause a little damage to the Akatsuki pair, thus making his own scheme all the easier. As soon as his men were gone, Orochimaru sat into his chair once more, reclining against the armrest. Perplexed with his master's nonchalance given the situation, Kabuto chose to venture a cautious suggestion. Orochimaru-sama, perhaps a strategic retreat would be the wisest course right now. Orochimaru sneered and gestured with his hand towards the table across the room. Nonsense, Kabuto-kun, we must receive our visitors as proper hosts. Now, bring me that file over on the table there. The silver-haired teenager complied with the command, but not without tossing his master an undisguised disgruntled glare. Orochimaru, however, paid Kabuto little heed as he took the file, staring into the lime-green liquid within while concentrating on the events taking shape outside the room. The Tannic clash began where the Snake Sanin had bidden his soldiers make their stand, with the Sound Four powering their seals to the second level and rushing into battle with the Akatsuki. So much delicious chakra resonated in the air on both sides, enough even to stimulate his dulled senses. Orochimaru's little rapture was to be short-lived, as a moment later something sailed towards his exposed back. The snake man sprang aside and rolled to the ground, taking caution to protect the glass container in his hand and glaring at the tri-bladed sickle that had SD his chair to pieces and was then resting on the grounds. The serpent's malicious golden gaze moved along the thick rope attached to the exotic weapon's handle back towards the room's entrance, and thus spotted its sneering owner standing in the corridor outside looking down at him. The heavy senin stood and returned the expression in equal measure. So, the new recruit is sent to deal with me. I suppose I ought to be insulted. Orochimaru had expected Kakazu to have one person chase him down while the other remained to handle the Sound 4, but had also expected the man's ever-present greed to push him to insist on taking the main prize with his own hands. Answer, seeing his nameless partner was a surprise. And quite the welcome surprise, the pale, scorched man mused as he looked up and down the angelic man. He recognized the emblem on the Akatsuki member's pendant as one associated with the Jashin religious order. The serpent had done more than a little research into the cult in the past, taking an interest in the rumor that Jashin's blessing was able to make a man immortal. However, to even acknowledge a higher power's existence was anathema to Orochimaru, so much more to pledge his soul to one, and so he had declined to seek a relationship with the cult. The handsome cultist noticed the snake man's roving gaze and burned with righteous rage. Deviant bastard. I'm hidden, Jashin's archangel, and I've come with his command to pass sentence on a heretic. Prepare to be sent to hell. Orochimaru smirked, seeing the religious passion in this man Hidden's expression. He was a genuine zealot. The snake Sanin couldn't help but wonder whether this pious dullard had a clue that Akatsuki's glorious leader claimed to be God in his own right, that the man giving his orders was a true heretic. Orochimaru would have so delighted in telling Hidden all about Pain's dementia. However, he had precious little time to spare. The Sound 4 would not be able to keep Kakazu busied much longer. The leprous-looking man swirled the file and raised the opening to his lips, leering at Hidden as he prepared to down its contents. I think not. Callow little lamb, bleating praises to an imagined god. The madman cackled and chugged the lime serum, a potent chakra-enhancing drug concocted using his own personal venom. Sensing danger, Hidden scowled and tugged on his rope, pulling his exotic weapon back to his hand. Orochimaru dropped to his knees as power rushed through him, overloading his capacities, and coughed out blood. Hidden glanced at the blood and smirked, but that didn't last. The snake Sanin looked ever more inhuman, ever more serpent than man, when his angular head snapped back up to regard his chosen new host. Learn now that there exists no power higher than Orochimaru. And then, Orochimaru began to change, reducing and morphing into an abomination that not even the most terrible nightmare could conceive. Hidden held his sickle in one arm and reached into his cloud-patterned Akatsuki robes with the other to pull out a long ritual pike. The enormous composite white serpent thing that was the heavy Senin's true persona, altered due to his innumerable experiments with Kinjutsu, towered entire meters over the silver-haired cultist and rushed him at an almost impossible speed. Hidden readied his two weapons to counter, but not in time to push back Orochimaru's charge. XXXXXXXXXX. Back in Konoha, a much subtler battle simmered within the council chambers. The Sandaime Hokage did his damnedest not to groan as he sat along with the elders listening to a droning report on the damages done in the Akatsuki's attack on the village. Sarutobi cared about the citizens who had lost their lives and their homes in the surprise attack, not how much it would cost the village to replace broken roads and electrical lines. Taking a quick glance around the room, he spied several that appeared to share the same opinion. No one save the civilian businessmen and landowners on the council seemed to take an interest in the report. Overall, earliest estimates place the damage as exceeding 75 million ryo. The old man repressed the urge to snort in derision while Utatane Koharu thanked the nasal-looking bureaucrat presenting the report and dismissed him. The Sandaime massaged his aching temples beneath his Hokage hat, wishing that he could remove the Seabursum thing. And also that the Akatsuki's Deodara might have shown him the compassion to bomb this particular building rather than some other random target, as having the council hall in ruins would have at least given the Hokage an excuse to avoid convening the council. Mitokado Homura spared his old teammate a concerned look at Sarutobi's other side, at which point the third straightened. I still cannot believe that a single cell managed to embarrass this entire village so. Hyuga Hyashi's cultured, aristocratic voice cut through the low mutterings that had pervaded the room ever since the economic report's end. For his own part, while the Sandaime shared the man's opinion, he was also somewhat relieved that the criminals had retreated on their own, lest the damage have much worse. Sarutobi had been in no condition to prosecute a battle with such men, still being weakened due to his war with Orochimaru. Further hostilities might have seen him and several Anbues and Naruto captured, leaving Konoha without a leader and her most dangerous secret in her enemies' hands. Akamaiki Chooser spoke out in his bass voice next, seizing on the silence that Hyashi's comment had created. Indeed, and even more galling is the reported reason behind their coming. The cold look that the Byakugan wielder leveled on the Akamaiki ruled out whatever impulse Sarutobi might have had to suspect collusion between the two, allowing the Hokage to concentrate his complete attention on Chooser. The Sandaime had been resigned to what was about to come ever since his little conversation with Uchiha Itachi had somehow been leaked to the populace, which meant that he had a traitor somewhere in Anbu. Either someone in the room had a rat within the core, or some soldier had chosen to vent his or her spleen on their own. Both were possible. There was a reason Anbu seldom recruited among the clans. The Hokage didn't want men who were torn between more than one master, nor did he want the clans to have access to Anbu's extensive intelligence. Itachi had been quite the exception rather than the norm on his recruitment. A certain civilian counselor, who Sarutobi well knew to be on the Akamaiki's client list, continued the current line in a supplicating tone that made the Hokage want to be ill with rage. However, there has been no report given on the matter. Please explain, Akamaiki-sama. Sarutobi continued to observe Chooser like a peregrine, preparing to strike at the obese man's slightest misstep. Perhaps there was no mole at all. There were several within Anbu that resented Naruto-kun's presence in the core, owing both to his age and inexperience and to his being a Jinchuriki. More still viewed him as an undisciplined loose cannon who shouldn't be given such a responsible position. However, he still didn't like to think that someone under his personal command would act upon such a childish rancor against a comrade. The Sandaime made a mental note to speak with Ibiki about instituting a rat hunt within the core when the man recovered. Meanwhile, the Hokage leaned over to listen to Chooser, whose words brought the mutterings back even louder. There has been word circulating around the village that Uchiha Itachi, the criminal ringleader, asked that Uzumaki Naruto be handed over to them, and that doing so would make them leave with no more incident. Konoha has been attacked and her people mad, all over one single miscreant. Homura pinned Chooser with a stern glare and interrupted the large man's diatribe. Few men would dare make such a hostile gesture against a man in the Lord Akamaiki's social position, but the third's personal advisor was a senior council member who had once been a consummate shinobi in his own right, and would not sit idle and brook even the most indirect criticism against the Hokage in silence. The man didn't like Naruto, and had remonstrated with Sarutobi several times in the past along with Koharu in private meetings against the third's mentor relationship with the Jinchuriki, but in the council hall Homura would support the Sandaime without ever wavering a bit, no matter what his personal opinions. Hokage-sama's response to that was correct. Konoha does not bargain with traitors. The third watched the exchange in stoic silence, more than willing to let Homura take his opponent to task in his place. Chooser opened his mouth to respond, but whatever retort he had on his tongue never came out. Instead, a shrill voice rang out through the hall. This new speaker was a middle-aged woman, an elected representative who had lost her husband and 2 sons in the demon's rampage, leaving her alone and ever bitter. She hated Naruto with a passion, and had not the same tact and political skill as Chooser possessed in hiding it. That demon continues to torment us all. He is a curse on our village. Hack him to pieces. Drive him out at least. He will bring us nothing but harm as long as he remains. This sudden outburst created gasps and shocked whispers, coupled with cold looks towards the shrieking representative. Even within the council chamber, the Hokage's law reigned supreme. Her words were punishable with immediate execution, and indeed the third moved his hand in preparation to order the 2 Anbu standing behind him to hustle her out to be put to death. Izuzuka Chum's teeth were bared in a slight snarl. The canine matriarch had come to accept and even like the blonde Jinchuriki due to his power as a shinobi and her son's close relationship with him. Even Akamaiki Chooser regarded the audacious representative with stern disapproval. Unfortunately, she is not alone. The gossip in the village, while not all believed it, had caused Naruto's more ardent haters, who had been silenced ever since the blonde's much publicized battle in the invasion, to regain their vitriol. Some were angered enough even to attempt something quite stupid. Sarutobi worried less about Naruto being in danger than about what he might, would, do to his attackers in retaliation. The Jinchuriki had the right to protect his well-being, but it wouldn't do to have him going on a demonic rampage over a mob that had consumed a little too much sake. Few would be able to stop the blonde should he go all out, and Sarutobi wasn't sure that those who could, such as Tenzu, would do so even under orders. As a precaution, the third had quarantined Naruto at the Sarutobi complex to recuperate, as the Blonde Zone apartment complex had been obliterated in his showdown with Hoshigaki Kisame, and his wounds were serious, and had Tenzu and Yugao keeping guard over him. Meanwhile, the Hokage would do as he must to silence the lad's real enemies on the council, as his hand moved to signal his Anbu interaction. Enough. The single word silenced the raving councilwoman in mid-rant, even as an Anbu pair materialized behind her and all other conversation halted as well. The elder who had spoken out rose and proceeded along the narrow aisle to the hall's central position, his cane clicking against the ground as he moved. Missing an arm and blinded on one side, he bore a noticeable cross-shaped scar on his chin. Danzu, the one-time Anbu NE commander and the peace-nurturing Sandaim's hated arch-rival on the Konoha Council, was the absolute last person that the Hokage would ever have expected to take his side on such a hot issue. Sarutobi, as well as Homura and Koharu at his sides, regarded the man with suspicion. The grizzled elder's squinting gaze swept the now silent chamber, meeting each council member and then halting on the representative. The woman was now quivering in her place, realizing that she had bitten onto much more than she could ever hope to chew. Sarutobi withdrew his order to his men, willing to wait and watch how this panned out. Uzumaki Naruto is Konoha's greatest potential weapon. To even suggest that he should be executed is ridiculous to the extreme. To exile the person in question would push him right into the Akatsuki's hands, or much worse, into a hostile village's service. Danzu stared hard at the civilian representative, daring her to argue with him. She didn't. Neither did the others who might have liked to see Naruto cast out or put to the sword. A man sitting near the elder did speak, however. Dressed in a warrior's kimono with his ceremonial dasho girded on as was his right, Todahiro was the Fire Lord's representative to Konoha's council. Though he was neither a shinobi nor a Konoha native, he was an experienced soldier and leader whose opinion on external matters was held in high esteem. You speak as though Konoha were about to go to war, Elder Danzu. Our neighbors are in poor condition to mount another attack. Danzu's mouth compressed into a thin smile, and Sarutobi knew that he had come in prepared to answer this question. However, the Hokage likewise knew that the comment hadn't been planned in advance. Toda served no man's interests other than his liege lord's, ever neutral in Konoha's political landscape and ever resistant to corruption. There can be no doubt that war is coming soon, Toda-san. Reports indicate that Iwa is mobilizing its troops at the border nearest Tsuna, and that Kumo is preparing to advance westward into the Hidden Sound. Neither village can hope to hold against a hostile invasion now. Konoha's two bitterest enemies will soon be knocking on her doorstep. These events created little surprise amongst the shinobi on the council, who had quite expected rival villages to stir given the abrupt change in the power balance. The Sandaime had seen the reports, and thus Danzu's words came as even less news to the Hokage. The latent chakra in the air around Hiashi stirred ever so little when Danzu mentioned the hidden cloud, though the man's expression remained as cold as ever. I must agree with Danzu-san. That child has committed no wrongdoing, and ought not to be persecuted. Sarutobi imagined that Naruto would be none too appreciative about being called a child. Nonetheless, Hiashi was an honorable man, and no doubt remembered that the lad had protected both his daughters on separate occasions, and had once chanced a battle against a raging Jinchuriki to do so. No matter whether or not the Hyuga head liked him, and the third knew not the answer to that, Hiashi remained bound to remit that household debt. At that point, other council members, including several that Sarutobi knew would have voted with Chusa had Danzu and Hiashi not spoken out in opposition, began to shake their heads in agreement with the aristocratic shinobi. The Sandaime shook his aged head in disgust, revolted with those brown-nosing swine who were much more interested in kissing the right arseholes than in acting in Konoha's best interests. HMPH, these spineless worms wouldn't know a thing about true conviction. Chusa meanwhile realized that the tide had turned against him, and that attempting to push his luck would lead to nothing but embarrassment, and thus said no more on the issue. Sarutobi had a whimsical urge to salt his wound and ask whether he wanted to put his proposal, even though he hadn't stated one outright, to a vote rather than letting him back down without incident, but his age and position required that he be above such common pettiness. Danzu remained standing, acknowledging Hiashi's support with a nod, and waited in silence until the discussion simmered down a bit. The warmongering elder spoke again as soon as he had the council's attention again. Yes, however, there are still certain matters that should be discussed. For one, I am much less interested in the actual reason those criminals came here, than with their being allowed to retreat unmolested, the same as with Orochimaru in his attempted invasion. The Sandaim's expression narrowed, as he discerned where Danzu was going with this. Quote, Konoha's two most notorious traitors have returned here to poison the great tree, and both have managed to escape without punishment or even pursuit. To me and those with like mind, these events point to improper leadership at the highest level. The Hokage must be held accountable. Danzu's game had now become obvious, and Sarutobi should have well known that his nemesis had no charitable motives in helping the Hokage to protect Naruto. The old hawk planned to hunt a much larger meal than a mere teenager. He would make sure Naruto wasn't the one taking the blame, so that he could redirect it all onto the Sandaime instead. No doubt he hoped to shame Sarutobi into resigning, or perhaps even attempt an impeachment vote, though such an initiative would require almost unanimous support amongst the entire council, and the third zone voting bloc would be more than enough to make certain that Danzu couldn't manage it. Utatane Koharu rose and chastised the man in a cold voice. Danzu, you will do well to remember. Sarutobi seized upon the interruption, and halted his old teammate with a raised hand. That will not be needed, Koharu-san. Elder Danzu makes a valid point, one that now leads us into the main reason I've convened the council. As Hokage, I have a most important announcement to make. The third let out a pained groan, genuine and staged in equal proportion, and stood. He moved over to the central position, and usurped Danzu's little pulpit in the process. His rival stared at him a moment, both angered and perplexed with this sudden move, and at last returned to his seat to allow the Hokage to speak. Sarutobi almost grinned at his back. The Sandaime could quite well guess the scenario that his nemesis had written, and he knew that he was about to ruin the whole thing. No doubt Danzu expected him to guard his position to the bitter end, allowing the hawk to be the leading voice clamoring to remove the incompetent old geezer, while building enough political momentum to garner the nomination to become the Godime when Sarutobi at last caved under the insurmountable pressure. Now he would instead be viewed as a bitter man who couldn't manage the respect not to browbeat the longtime leader who was preparing to renounce his retirement regardless. The loathing looks that some high-ranking council members, including Todahiro and several prominent Konoha clan heads, were giving Danzu as he reclaimed his seat spoke as much. Sarutobi. Homura didn't even bother with an addendum, while Danzu seethed in his spot at having been outmaneuvered. And the Sandaime hadn't even revealed his last trump card. As long as he lived, Sarutobi would never allow a man like his nemesis to tarnish Konoha's most exalted position, and neither would the person who was soon to succeed him, he was quite certain. These recent events have made me realize that I no longer have the strength or assen to lead this village through the harsh times to come. I have served a long time, and I am proud to have done so, no matter how high the cost has been. Sarutobi removed his ceremonial hat to reveal his balding, whitened head, including a pronounced bruise above his ear where Orochimaru had kicked him during their battle. For a moment, as he looked around the room at his audience, the Sandaime Hokage paused to consider how much his position had cost him. 2 sons had during the last war, and then he'd shoved the last aside so that he would never have to experience loss so great again. However, I am now an old man, and I am too tired to keep going on. Thus, I announce to the council now that I am retiring as Hokage. I will soon be departing Konoha once more, this time to retrieve the Godime, whom the Fire Lord and I have decided upon. The last announcement about the Godime was like an explosive note being detonated inside the chamber, as the council went into an uproar. Choosing the Hokage was their right and privilege according to tradition, but their opinions meant little given the Fire Lord and the Sandaime had come to a consensus. The old man couldn't wait to take his own place on the council as the Sarutobi clan's head when soon it became Hokage, and to see how her notorious quick temper would react to the maddening elders. The now retired Sandaime imagined that it would be quite the impressive sight to behold, and he quite intended to relax and watch, as he did right then with regards to the chaos around him. Ha! Old man, indeed. I feel as young as I was when I became Hokage to start. XXXXXXXXXXX. Orochimaru stood over the downed hidden with a kunai in his one hand. The snake man leered at him and prepared to deliver a king blow, white serpents littering the entire room. However, at that moment, a massive hand wrapped around his tea and raised him into the air, and then continued with him in hand to crush him into the closest wall. The impact snapped Orochimaru's en, and near decapitated him outright. The snake Sanon's pallid head lolled to one side, blood pouring out through his mouth, and then his charred, bleeding husk moved no more. Pathetic, Hiden. You can't even take out a damned cripple. You're an embarrassment to Akatsuki. Kakazu stared down at his partner through remorseless green orbs as he strode into the room, kicking Oto Nin to the side as he crossed the threshold. Innumerable ink-black threads connected the false Nin's severed hand, which still pinned Orochimaru's corpse against the wall across his room, to his wrist. Kakazu was covered in crimson gore to the point that the red clouds on his Akatsuki robes were almost indistinguishable. A golden arrow protruded through his back, piercing into his broken lightning element mask. A punctured human heart was contained within the mask, however, the loss did nothing to even slow Kakazu. Hiden on the ground groaned and twitched. Quote. Blow me, Kakazu, fing asshole. The Takinukanen made no attempt to help his partner in standing, and instead reeled in his arm threads, pulling Orochimaru's corpse to him. The kunai in his hand at last clattered to the ground. Manners, Hiden. It looks like I broke him. Well, there's no point in wasting time then. Kakazu reached behind his back and held the arrow loose, pulling the ruptured heart out along with it. He stared at the thing a moment and then tossed it to the ground, and brought his hand back over to part his robes. The seams around where his heart would be unraveled and his stat skin loosed, revealing a black mess beneath. More threads emerged through and speared towards Orochimaru's chest, plunging into and removing his heart, which was still beating ever so little despite his broken en. Had the false Nin been watching Hiden, he might have seen a malicious, victorious smirk cross his angelic visage as Kakazu implanted the heavy Senon's heart into his chest, while the one there moved back to replenish his mask. The look was gone when Kakazu turned back to his partner and gripped his shoulder, being none too gentle as he at last pulled him upright. Move it. Look around and see what's worth plundering here while I prepare this snake's head to be sold. And retrieve his ring. Hiden swatted Kakazu's hand loose and leaned against the wall, staring at the ground, hands at his sides. The religious man remained there several moments, while his partner ignored him and prepared Orochimaru's head with all a surgeon's meticulous care. The priest then began to chuckle, crossing his arms as he doubled over with mirth. Kakazu looked back with an irritated glower, and his skin darkened with his rage. Hiden, what in the hell is so damn? The Jashin cultist's head snapped up at that moment. However, rather than Hiden's lavender orbs, the big man stared straight into gold with S pupils. To his credit, Kakazu's reaction to the new threat was immediate, as he hurled his prepared head to the side and took aim at his possessed partner with both arms, and blasted 2 rocket punches at his head, while detaching his masks at the same time. Orochimaru was much quicker on the draw, however, and brought his hands together in a snake seal, and with his sign, the envenomed potion which had been trapped in his previous host's heart and had spread through Kakazu's bloodstream into his reserve mask hearts as well responded. The false Nin let out an agonized shout and sank to his knees as the poison attacked him. His masks clattered to the ground and the hearts within stopped, while his rocket punches veered wild and impacted the wall above Orochimaru and to his side, creating 2 huge craters in the stone. Ku, poor old Kaku-chan, made ever so predictable in his insatiable greed. The snake Sanon grabbed Hiden's metal pike on the ground and sauntered towards Kakazu with an arrogant nonchalance. Even then, the corrosive serum was eating huge holes in the Taki Nin's threads, leaving him even more powerless to resist. For Orochimaru, the substance provided a substantial chakra boost. To others, however, the potion was quite lethal. The huge Akatsuki member glared at the serpent in priest's clothing, who instead sneered back through Hiden's lips in his serpentine manner. Kakazu's skin began to darken again as he tried to overcome his predicament through power, but in vain. The false Nin slumped over with a pained groan. Ugh! Orochimaru, conniving bastard. Orochimaru kneeled to the ground to straight right down Kakazu's nose, reveling in the proud man's helplessness. The hearts inside his masks were spilling blood out onto the ground, and his breathing was becoming labored. The poison would kill him soon. I'll take that as a compliment. I should thank Pain as well. You see, I required a new host and he was kind enough to provide. Kakazu's glare remained strong despite his wretched condition. Had he been able to move his arms to pull down his mask, he no doubt would have spat onto the snake man. The Akatsuki member's voice was reduced to a low rasp when he spoke again. Laugh, now, but in the end, No one double-crosses the organization and lives. Orochimaru snorted in response to the cliched line. Bah, how boring, and so. Orochimaru's movement was as quick as a striking snake, as he plunged Hiden's pike into Kakazu's heart. He seized and gurgled when the ritual instrument impaled him. The serpent man, looking so much like a wicked angel in the Jashin monk's skin, leaned down to whisper into the false nin's ear. Sayonara. The snake man remained there until Kakazu's breathing ceased at last. As soon as the man was Orochimaru rose and looked down at the Oto nin guard that the Takinukanen had kicked to the side while entering the room, and regarded him with a smirk. Enough relaxation now, Kabuto-kun, there's still work to be done. The Oto nin sat up and removed his mask and bandana to reveal Yakushi Kabuto, whose corpse manipulation skills had been ever so essential in ensnaring Kakazu. The medic wheezed and rubbed his ribs where the Goliath had booted him, allowing his regenerative abilities to heal the slight internal damage. Kabuto then reached into his pocket to retrieve his glasses, which his sound shinobi garb hadn't allowed him to wear. The silver-haired shinobi stood and strolled over to stand next to his master in his new host, and looked down at the false nin with an eerie smirk that almost mirrored Orochimaru's. I still can't believe that dangerous plan worked so well. Your genius is quite humbling, Orochimaru-sama. Orochimaru smiled again and waved the accolades aside, though he didn't look the least bit displeased to hear them. Meanwhile, the snake man shrugged Hiden's thick Akatsuki cloak loose, leaving him clad in nothing but black pants beneath, and then removed his Jashin religious ornaments and tossed them to the side like trash into the copious blood pooled on the ground around Kakazu. Fools like Kaku-chan are the simplest to manipulate. I knew he would never be able to resist such tantalizing bait. The heavy Sennin's malicious golden gaze, which looked so odd on Hiden, trailed over to his previous host on the ground, and the gaping hole over his heart in particular. The ravaged corpse's second skin was beginning to peel loose, revealing glimpses at the kunoiki who had been Orochimaru's last vessel beneath, an attractive brunette woman. Kabuto looked over with them, and then around the blood-covered room. I suppose we'll be evacuating this base now. The snake Sannin lingered on his previous incarnation a moment longer, and then nodded his agreement. Indeed, Akatsuki somehow knew about this location, and I dare not chance a repeat battle. Konoha will no doubt be poking their noses around soon as well. I'll have to move operations to the southern base. Prepare to leave this place at once. Take the important records and torch the rest, and then loose the specimens out into the wild. The medic nin blinked in surprise at the last command, and then his lips curved into a most sinister smile. That should prove to be quite the peril to whoever decides to scavenge here. Kabuto stuck his hands in his pockets and strolled out to execute his orders. Orochimaru meanwhile leaned over to grab Kakazu's wrist and remove his Akatsuki ring. Now he had 3 in his possession, and given that Pain's little Biju extraction jutsu was so much harder to execute with 1 ring bearer missing, this would no doubt place quite the snag in his schemes. The snake Sannin began to laugh aloud, with the sound ricocheting in the room, creating a mad orchestra in the air. He had claimed a brand new host, and an ideal one at that, and had ruined Akatsuki's long-term plans, all in one improvised masterstroke. Orochimaru looked at all the white serpents littering the ground, several mottled with blood, and laughed hard again as he recalled the portent. He was still in the game. The snake man clutched at his stomach, as though a sudden pain had run through him, but soon pushed the source down and began his insane act once more, with nothing save 2 corpses as his captive audience. The snake Sannin's cruel, mad laughter was now the last noise, the sole music to be heard within the hidden sound. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.